In this problem, we're told that a farmer has decided to use a new additive to grow his crops. He divided his farm into 10 plots and kept records of the corn yield in bushels before and after using the additive. The results are given in the table. We are testing the claim that corn yield is higher after using the additive at the 0.05 significance level. In this particular case, because we see that we have before and after data, we're testing a claim that the yield is higher after using the additive. That tells me that we're working with matched pairs. We can see that the data is paired here. So what I'm going to do is a t-test with matched pairs. Now, when I do a t-test with matched pairs, I know that my null hypothesis is always going to be mu sub d is equal to 0. So this is always the case with matched pairs. And I need to figure out my alternative hypothesis. So that's going to be mu sub d and something with 0. So is it greater than, less than, or not equal to? That's what I have to decide now. Since in the problem they said that corn yield is higher after using the additive, that tells me that we're doing a one-tail test. Now I can either do this as a left-tail test or a right-tail test. So I can either go with less than or greater than for my alternative hypothesis. And in this case, I'm going to use greater than. And I'll show you how we can use less than along the way. So since I decided to do a right-tail test, I'm going to go ahead and put my data into L1 and L2. So before goes into L1, after is into L2, just because that's the order in which they're given. So now I've got my data in the calculator. I've got the before values in list 1, the after values in list 2. And what I need to do is I need to take these two lists and combine them into one list by subtracting. And since I decided for my alternative hypothesis to be a right-tail test, that means I need to take the bigger values minus the smaller values in terms of which list is supposed to be the larger. Now, I'm not looking at the actual data to determine this. I go back and it said that we're testing the claim that corn yield is higher after using the additive. So it's based on this, that the corn yield is higher after. That's what tells me that the after is larger. I don't look at the numbers at all when I'm figuring out which one is supposed to be bigger. So, since I want positive values, we're going to make L3 L2 minus L1, because then we have after minus before, and our expectation is that that will be on average greater than 0. That's what we're testing. So, how do I put my data into L3? How do I get the two lists to subtract? You could do it by hand. I mean, you could subtract these numbers, are pretty easy to subtract, but you can subtract them all at once by going into the very top of L3 and type in L2 minus L1. And how you do that is you press second and the number 2 minus second and the number 1. And when you press enter, it's going to fill in the differences of all of these. So you'll get 1, 0, 1, and so on and so forth. And here you can see I have all the values filled in here. And since we see that they're all positive or 0, It gives me a good feeling that the after is larger than before, but we actually have to go through the test to determine this, that it's statistically significant. All right, so now I've got my data in, and that's really the big part of the problem, is figuring out which order you're going to subtract these in and how that's going to affect the problem. Now, suppose I had decided to do a left tail test. So suppose I had said that the null hypothesis was mu sub d equals 0, and the alternative is mu sub d is less than 0. That's fine. In that case, I would have made L3 L1 minus L2. And then we're going to get the same p-value, same conclusion, the test statistic will be the same number, but opposite in sign. And that's totally fine. So if, suppose the test statistic turned out to be negative 1.72 when I do the problem this way, then if I was doing a right tail test, the test statistic would have been positive 1.72. So either one would be accepted. I don't think either of those are the answer because I just made that up. So now let's go back to the problem and keep working on that. All right, so I have my hypotheses written in. Now I need to find my test statistic and my p-value. And I can do that using t-test on the calculator. When I'm doing a t-test for matched pairs, my input will have to be data. Mu 0 is 0, because that's the value from the null hypothesis. My list is L3 because it's the list of the differences. So be very careful that you use the correct list here, and then when you're doing other problems, make sure that you change back if that's needed. And then we have mu is greater than mu 0 because I decided to do a right tail test because I like to do a right tail test. If you like to do a left tail test, then you should do a left tail test, and it really doesn't matter. And we can choose calculate or draw. Now, remember, if you're doing a left tail test, you're going to have to subtract your lists in the opposite order, but other than that is totally fine. So if I hit calculate, then, oops, undo, there we go. Okay, if I hit calculate, then I'm going to get this result with my test statistic and my p-value. Now notice that my p-value is in scientific notation. Don't say that your p-value is 3.6261, right? Because we're rounding that to 4 places. This says E negative 4, which means that actually your p-value is 0.00036260751, and we can round that to 4 places, and that's going to turn out to be 0.0004 because we're rounding that to 4 places. So that's our p-value. You can see it also here in if you choose draw, and our test statistic is 5.01. You can see that either place here. So either calculate or draw, either one is fine to do. So now I'm going to write in my test statistic. That was 5.01. My p-value was 0.0004. And I'm comparing that with alpha, which is 0.05. So since alpha is greater than my p-value, I've got a little p-value, I'm going to reject the null hypothesis, and cha-ching, that is the final answer. So if you had done a left tail test, The only thing it would change in the results is that your test statistic would be negative 5.01. So I would accept either one of these answers as long as they match up with the correct hypothesis. So you just have to make sure those work out. And that is the end of that problem.